Tonight, we drift into a quieter world, where a fearless soldier of fortune discovers a pair of worn buffalo leather boots and encounters a disguised king in the deep forest, where the Holy Mother is hidden from a venomous adder by the whispering leaves of a hazel bush, and where a poor, fatherless peasant boy walks straight. I mean to be somebody and do something useful in the world, said the eldest of 5 brothers. I don't care how humble my position is, so that I can only do some good, which will be something. I intend to be a brick maker. Bricks are always wanted, and I shall be really doing something. Your something is not enough for me, said the second brother. What you talk of doing is nothing at all. It is journeyman's work, or might even be done by a machine. No, I should prefer to be a builder at once. There is something real in that. A man gains a position. He becomes a citizen, has his own sign, his own house of call for his workmen. So I shall be a builder. If all goes well in time, I shall become a master and have my own journeyman, and my wife will be treated as a master's wife. This is what I call something. I call it all nothing, said the third. Not in reality any position. There are many in a town far above a master builder in position. You may be an upright man, but even as a master, you will only be ranked among common men. I know better what to do than that. I will be an architect, which will place me among those who possess riches and intellect, and who speculate in art. I shall certainly have to rise by my own endeavors from a bricklayer's laborer, or as a carpenter's apprentice. A lad wearing a paper cap, although I now wear a silk hat. I shall have to fetch beer and spirits for the journeyman, and they will call me thou, which will be an insult. I shall endure it, however, for I shall look upon it all as a mere representation, a masquerade, a mummery, which tomorrow, that is when I myself, as a journeyman, shall have served my time, will vanish, and I shall go my way, and all that has passed will be nothing to me. Then I shall enter the academy and get instructed in drawing, and be called an architect. I may even attain to rank, and have something placed before or after my name, and I shall build as others have done before me. By this there will be always something to make me remembered, and is not that worth living for? Not in my opinion, said the fourth. I will never follow the lead of others, and only imitate what they have done. I will be a genius, and become greater than all of you together. I will create a new style of building, and introduce a plan for erecting houses suitable to the climate, with material easily obtained in the country, and thus suit national feeling and the developments of the age, besides building a story for my own genius. But supposing the climate and the material are not good for much, said the fifth brother. That would be very unfortunate for you and have an influence over your experiments. Nationality may assert itself until it becomes affectation, and the developments of a century may run wild as youth often does. I see clearly that none of you will ever really be anything worth notice, however you may now fancy it. But do as you like, I shall not imitate you. I mean to keep clear of all these things and criticize what you do. In every action, something imperfect may be discovered, something not right, which I shall make it my business to find out and expose. That will be something I fancy. And he kept his word and became a critic. People said of this fifth brother, there is something very precise about him. He has a good headpiece, but he does nothing. And on that very account, they thought he must be something. Now you see, this is a little history which will never end. As long as the world exists, there will always be men like these 5 brothers. And what became of them? Were they each nothing or something? You shall hear. It is quite a history. The eldest brother, he who fabricated bricks, soon discovered that each brick, when finished, brought him in a small coin, if only a copper one, and many copper pieces, if placed one upon another, can be changed into a shining shilling. And at whatever door a person knocks who has a number of these in his hands, whether it be the baker's, the butcher's, or the tailor's, the door flies open, and he can get all he wants. So you see the value of bricks. Some of the bricks, however, crumbled to pieces or were broken, but the elder brother found a use for even these on the high bank of earth, which formed a dike on the sea coast. A poor woman named Margaret wished to build herself a house, so all the imperfect bricks were given to her, and a few whole ones with them. For the eldest brother was a kind-hearted man, although he never achieved anything higher than making bricks. The poor woman built herself a little house. It was small and narrow, and the window was quite crooked, the door too low, and the straw roof might have been better thatched. But still, it was a shelter, and from within you could look far over the sea, which dashed wildly against the seawall on which the little house was built. The salt waves sprinkled their white foam over it, but it stood firm and remained long after he who had given the bricks to build it was dead and buried. The second brother, of course, knew better how to build than poor Margaret, for he served an apprenticeship to learn it. When his time was up, he packed up his knapsack and went on his travels, singing the journeyman's song. While young, I can wander without a care and build new houses everywhere. fair and bright, are my dreams of home, always thought of wherever I roam. Hurrah for a workman's life of glee. There's a loved one at home who thinks of me, home and friends I can ne'er forget, and I mean to be a master yet, and that is what he did. On his return home, he became a master builder, built one house after another in the town, till they formed quite a street, which, when finished, became really an ornament to the town. These houses built us for him in return, which was to be his own. But how can houses build a house? If the houses were asked, they could not answer. But the people would understand and say, certainly the street built his house for him. It was not very large, and the floor was of lime. But when he danced with his bride on the lime-covered floor, it was to him white and shining, and from every stone in the wall, flowers seemed to spring forth and decorate the room, as with the richest tapestry. It was really a pretty house, and in it were a happy pair. The flag of the corporation fluttered before it, and the journeymen and apprentices shouted, "Hurrah!" He had gained his position, he had made himself something, and at last he died, which was something too. Now we come to the architect, the third brother, who had been first a carpenter's apprentice, had worn a cap, and served as an errand boy, but afterwards went to the academy and risen to be an architect, a high and noble gentleman. Ah, yes, the houses of the new street, which the brother who was a master builder erected, may have built his house for him, but the street received its name from the architect, and the handsomest house in the street became his property. That was something, and he was something, for he had a list of titles before and after his name. His children were called Wellborn, and when he died, his widow was treated as a lady of position, and that was something. His name remained always written at the corner of the street, and lived in everyone's mouth as its name. Yes, this also was something. And what about the genius of the family, the fourth brother, who wanted to invent something new and original? He tried to build a lofty story himself, but it fell to pieces, and he fell with it, and broke his neck. However, he had a splendid funeral, with the city flags and music in the procession. Flowers were strewn on the pavement, and 3 orations were spoken over his grave, each one longer than the other. He would have liked this very much during his life, as well as the poems about him in the papers, for he liked nothing so well as to be talked of. A monument was also erected over his grave. It was only another story over him, but that was something. Now he was dead, like the 3 other brothers. The youngest, the critic, outlived them all, which was quite right for him. It gave him the opportunity of having the last word, which to him was of great importance. People always said he had a good headpiece. At last, his hour came, and he died, and arrived at the gates of heaven. Souls always enter these gates in pairs. So he found himself standing and waiting for admission with another. And who should it be but old Dame Margaret from the house on the dike? It is evidently for the sake of contrast that I and this wretched soul should arrive here exactly at the same time, said the critic. Pray, who are you, my good woman? Said he. Do you want to get in here too? And the old woman curtsied as well as she could. She thought it must be St. Peter himself who spoke to her. I am a poor old woman, she said, without my family. I am old Margaret that lived in the house on the dike. Well, and what have you done? What great deed have you performed down below? I have done nothing at all in the world that could give me a claim to have these doors open for me, she said. It would be only through mercy that I can be allowed to slip in through the gate. In what manner did you leave the world? He asked, just for the sake of saying something, for it made him feel very weary to stand there and wait. How I left the world, she replied. Why, I can scarcely tell you. During the last years of my life, I was sick and miserable, and I was unable to bear creeping out of bed suddenly into the frost and cold. Last winter was a hard winter, but I have got over it all now. There were a few mild days, as your honor no doubt knows. The ice lay thickly on the lake, as far one could see. The people came from the town and walked upon it, and they say there were dancing and skating upon it, I believe, and a great feasting. The sound of beautiful music came into my poor little room where I lay. Towards evening, when the moon rose beautifully, though not yet in her full splendor, I glanced from my bed over the wide sea, and there, just where the sea and sky met, rose a curious white cloud. I lay looking at the cloud till I observed a little black spot in the middle of it, which gradually grew larger and larger, and then I knew what it meant. I am old and experienced, and although this token is not often seen, I knew it, and a shuddering seized me. Twice in my life had I seen this same thing, and I knew that there would be an awful storm with a spring tide, which would overwhelm the poor people who were now out on the ice, drinking, dancing, and making merry. Young and old, the whole city were there, who was to warn them if no one noticed the sign or knew what it meant. As I did, I was so alarmed that I felt more strength and life than I had done for some time. I got out of bed and reached the window. I could not crawl any farther from weakness and exhaustion, but I managed to open the window. I saw the people outside running and jumping about on the ice. I saw the beautiful flags waving in the wind. I heard the boys shouting, "Hurrah!" and the lads and lasses singing, and everything full of merriment and joy. But there was the white cloud with the black spot hanging over them. I cried out as loudly as I could, but no one heard me. I was too far off from the people. Soon would the storm burst the icebreak, and all who were on it be irretrievably lost. They could not hear me, and to go to them was quite out of my power. Oh, if I could only get them safe on land. Then came the thought, as if from heaven, that I would rather set fire to my bed and let the house be burnt down than that so many people should perish miserably. I got a light, and in a few moments, the red flames leaped up as a beacon to them. I escaped, fortunately, as far as the threshold of the door. But there, I fell down and remained. I could go no farther. The flames rushed out towards me, flickered on the window, and rose high above the roof. The people on the ice became aware of the fire and ran as fast as possible to help a poor, sick woman who, as they thought, was being burnt to death. There was not one who did not run. I heard them coming, and I also, at the same time, was conscious of a rush of air and a sound like the roar of heavy artillery. The spring flood was lifting the ice, covering which break into 1,000 pieces. But the people had reached the seawall, where the sparks were flying round. I had saved them all, but I suppose I could not survive the cold and fright. So I came up here to the gates of paradise. I am told they are open to poor creatures such as I am, and I have now no house left on earth. But I do not think that will give me a claim to be admitted here. Then the gates were opened, and an angel led the old woman in. She had dropped one little straw out of her straw bed when she set it on fire to save the lives of so many. It had been changed into the purest gold, into gold that constantly grew and expanded into flowers and fruit of immortal beauty. "See," said the angel, pointing to the wonderful straw. "This is what the poor woman has brought. What dost thou bring? I know thou hast accomplished nothing, not even made a single brick. Even if thou couldst return and at least produce so much, very likely when made, the brick would be useless unless done with a good will, which is always something. But thou canst not return to earth, and I can do nothing for thee." Then the poor soul, the old mother, who had lived in the house on the dike, pleaded for him. She said, His brother made all the stone and bricks and sent them to me to build my poor little dwelling, which was a great deal to do for a poor woman like me. Could not all these bricks and pieces be as a wall of stone to prevail for him? It is an act of mercy. He is wanting it now. And here is the very fountain of mercy. Then said the angel, "Thy brother, he who has been looked upon as the meanest of you all, he whose honest deeds to thee appeared so humble, it is he who has sent you this heavenly gift. Thou shalt not be turned away. Thou shalt have permission to stand without the gate and reflect and repent of thy life on earth. But thou shalt not be admitted here until thou hast performed one good deed of repentance, which will indeed for thee be something." I could have expressed that better, thought the critic, but he did not say it aloud, which for him was something after all. "We three flew away together through the air," said they. "A hunter caught sight of us and shot at us with an arrow. The arrow struck our young friend and sister, and slowly singing her farewell song, she sank down a dying swan into the forest lake. On the shores of the lake, under a spreading birch tree, we laid her in the cold earth. We had our revenge. We bound fire under the wings of a swallow who had a nest on the thatched roof of the huntsman. The house took fire and burst into flames. The hunter was burnt with the house, and the light was reflected over the sea as far as the spreading birch beneath which we laid her sleeping dust. She will never return to the land of Egypt." And then they both wept. And Stork Papa, who heard the story, snapped with his beak so that it might be heard a long way off. "Deceit and lies," cried he. "I should like to run my beak deep into their chests, and perhaps break it off," said the Mama Stork. "Then what a sight you would be. Think first of yourself, and then of your family. All others are nothing to us." "Yes, I know," said the Stork Papa. "But tomorrow I can easily place myself on the edge of the open cupola, when the learned and wise men assemble to consult on the state of the sick man. Perhaps they may come a little nearer to the truth." And the learned and wise men assembled together and talked a great deal on every point. But the stork could make no sense out of anything they said. Neither were there any good results from their consultations, either for the sick man or for his daughter in the marshy heath. When we listen to what people say in this world, we shall hear a great deal. But it is an advantage to know what has been said and done before when we listen to a conversation. The stork did, and we know at least as much as he, the stork. Love is a life giver. The highest love produces the highest life. Only through love can the sick man be cured. This had been said by many, and even the learned men acknowledged that it was a wise saying. "What a beautiful thought!" exclaimed the Papa Stork immediately. "I don't quite understand it," said the Mama Stork when her husband repeated it. "However, it is not my fault, but the fault of the thought. Whatever it may be, I have something else to think of." Now the learned men had spoken also of love between this one and that one, of the difference of the love which we have for our neighbor, to the love that exists between parents and children, of the love of the plant for the light, and how the germ springs forth when the sunbeam kisses the ground. All these things were so elaborately and learnedly explained that it was impossible for Stork Papa to follow it, much less to talk about it. His thoughts on the subject quite weighed him down. He stood the whole of the following day on one leg, with half-shut eyes, thinking deeply. So much learning was quite a heavy weight for him to carry. One thing, however, the Papa Stork could understand. Everyone high and low had from their inmost hearts expressed their opinion that it was a great misfortune for so many thousands of people, the whole country indeed, to have this man so sick with no hopes of his recovery, and what joy and blessing it would spread around if he could by any means be cured. But where bloomed the flower that could bring him health? They had searched for it everywhere, in learned writings, in the shining stars, in the weather and wind. Inquiries had been made in every byway that could be thought of, until at last the wise and learned men has asserted, as we have been already told, that love the life-giver could alone give new life to a father. And in saying this, they had overdone it, and said more than they understood themselves. They repeated it and wrote it down as a recipe. Love is a life-giver. But how could such a recipe be prepared? That was a difficulty they could not overcome. At last, it was decided that help could only come from the princess herself, whose whole soul was wrapped up in her father, especially as a plan had been adopted by her to enable her to obtain a remedy. More than a year had passed since the princess had set out at night, when the light of the young moon was soon lost beneath the horizon. She had gone to the marble sphinx in the desert, shaking the sand from her sandals, and then passed through the long passage which leads to the center of one of the great pyramids, where the mighty kings of antiquity, surrounded with pomp and splendor, lie veiled in the form of mummies. She had been told by the wise men that if she laid her head on the breast of one of them from the head, she would learn where to find life and recovery for her father. She had performed all this, and in a dream had learnt that she must bring home to her father the lotus flower which grows in the deep sea near the moors, and heath in the Danish land. The very place and situation had been pointed out to her, and she was told that the flower would restore her father to health and strength. And therefore she had gone forth from the land of Egypt, flying over to the open marsh and the wild moor in the plumage of a swan. The papa and mama storks knew all this, and we also know it now. We know too that the Marsh King has drawn her down to himself, and that to the loved ones at home she is forever dead. One of the wisest of them said, as the stork mama also said, that in some way she would, after all, manage to succeed. And so, at last, they comforted themselves with this hope and would wait patiently. In fact, they could do nothing better. I should like to get away the swan's feathers from those two treacherous princesses, said the papa stork. Then at least they would not be able to fly over again to the wild moor and do more wickedness. I can hide the two suits of feathers over yonder till we find some use for them. But where will you put them? Asked the mama stork. In our nest on the moor. I and the young ones will carry them by turns during our flight across. And as we return, should they prove too heavy for us, we shall be sure to find plenty of places on the way in which we can conceal them till our next journey. Certainly, one suit of swan's feathers would be enough for the princess, but two are always better. In those northern countries, no one can have too many traveling wrappers. No one will thank you for it, said Stork Mama, but you are master, and excepting at breeding time, I have nothing to say. In the Viking's castle on the wild moor, to which the storks directed their flight in the following spring, the little maiden still remained. They had named her Helga, which was rather too soft a name for a child with a temper like hers, although her form was still beautiful. Every month, this temper showed itself in sharper outlines, and in the course of years, while the storks still made the same journeys, in autumn to the hill, and in spring to the moors, the child grew to be almost a woman, and before anyone seemed aware of it, she was a wonderfully beautiful maiden of 16. The casket was splendid, but the contents were worthless. She was indeed wild and savage, even in those hard, uncultivated times. It was a pleasure to her to splash about with her white hands in the warm blood of the horse which had been slain for sacrifice. In one of her wild moods, she bit off the head of the black cock which the priest was about to slay for the sacrifice. To her foster father, she said one day, "If thine enemy were to pull down thine house about thy ears, and thou shouldest be sleeping in unconscious security, I would not wake thee. Even if I had the power, I would never do it, for my ears still tingle with the blow that thou gavest me years ago." I have never forgotten it." But the Viking treated her words as a joke. He was like everyone else, bewitched with her beauty, and knew nothing of the change in the form and temper of Helga at night. Without a saddle, she would sit on a horse as if she were a part of it while it rushed along at full speed. Nor would she spring from its back even when it quarreled with other horses and bit them. She would often leap from the high shore into the sea with all her clothes on and swim to meet the Viking when his boat was steering home towards the shore. She once cut off a long lock of her beautiful hair and twisted it into a string for her bow. "If a thing is to be done well," said she, "I must do it myself." The Viking's wife was, for the time in which she lived, a woman of strong character and will. But compared to her daughter, she was a gentle, timid woman, and she knew that a wicked sorcerer had the terrible child in his power. It was sometimes as if Helga acted from sheer wickedness, for often when her mother stood on the threshold of the door or stepped into the yard, she would seat herself on the brink of the well, wave her arms and legs in the air, and suddenly fall right in. Here she was able, from her frog nature, to dip and dive about in the water of the deep well, until at last she would climb forth like a cat and come back into the hall, dripping with water, so that the green leaves that were strewed on the floor were whirled round and carried away by the streams that flowed from her. But there was one time of the day which placed a check upon Helga. It was the evening twilight. When this hour arrived, she became quiet and thoughtful and allowed herself to be advised and led. Then also a secret feeling seemed to draw her towards her mother. And as usual, when the sun set and the transformation took place, both in body and mind, inwards and outwards, she would remain quiet and mournful, with her form shrunk together in the shape of a frog. Her body was much larger than those animals ever are, and on this account it was much more hideous in appearance, for she looked like a wretched dwarf with a frog's head and webbed fingers. Her eyes had a most piteous expression. She was without a voice, excepting a hollow croaking sound, like the smothered sobs of a dreaming child. Then the Viking's wife took her on her lap and forgot the ugly form as she looked into the mournful eyes, and often said, "I could wish that thou wouldst always remain my dumb frog child, for thou art too terrible when thou art clothed in a form of beauty." And the Viking woman wrote runic characters against sorcery and spells of sickness, and threw them over the wretched child. But they did no good. One can scarcely believe that she was ever small enough to lie in the cup of the water lily, said the Papa Stork. And now she is grown up, and the image of her Egyptian mother, especially about the eyes. Ah, We shall never see her again. Perhaps she has not discovered how to help herself as you and the wise men said she would. Year after year have I flown across and across the moor, but there was no sign of her being still alive. Yes, and I may as well tell you that each year, when I arrived a few days before you to repair the nest and put everything in its place, I have spent a whole night flying here and there over the marshy lake, as if I had been an owl or a bat, but all to no purpose. The 2 suit of swan's plumage, which I and the young ones dragged over here from the land of the Nile, are of no use. Trouble enough it was to us to bring them here in 3 journeys, and now they are lying at the bottom of the nest. And if a fire should happen to break out and the wooden house be burnt down, they would be destroyed. And our good nest would be destroyed too, said the mama stork. But you think less of that than of your plumage, stuff, and your Moor princess. Go and stay with her in the marsh if you like. You are a bad father to your own children, as I have told you already when I hatched my first brood. I only hope neither we nor our children may have an arrow sent through our wings owing to that wild girl. Helga does not know in the least what she is about. We have lived in this house longer than she has. She should think of that, and we have never forgotten our duty. We have paid every year our toll of a feather, an egg, and a young one, as it is only right we should do. You don't suppose I can wander about the courtyard or go everywhere as I used to do in old times. I can do it in Egypt, where I can be a companion of the people without forgetting myself. But here I cannot go and peep into the pots and kettles as I do there. No, I can only sit up here and feel angry with that girl, the little wretch. And I am angry with you too. You should have left her lying in the water lily. Then no one would have known anything about her. You are far better than your conversation, said the papa stork. I know you better than know yourself. And with that, he gave a hop and flapped his wings twice proudly. Then he stretched his neck and flew, or rather soared away, without moving his outspread wings. He went on for some distance, and then he gave a great flap with his wings, and flew on his course at a rapid rate, his head and neck bending proudly before him, while the sun's rays fell on his glossy plumage. "I is the handsomest of them all," said the mama stork as she watched him, "but I won't tell him so." Early in the autumn, the Viking again returned home laden with spoil and bringing prisoners with him. Among them was a young Christian priest one of those who contemned the gods of the north. Often lately, there had been, both in hall and chamber, a talk of the new faith which was spreading far and wide in the south, and which, through the means of the holy Ansgarius, had already reached as far as Hedeby on the Schlei. Even Helga had heard of this belief in the teachings of one who was named Christ, and who, for the love of mankind and for their redemption, had given up his life. But to her, all this had, as it were, gone in one ear and out the other. It seemed that she only understood the meaning of the word love when, in the form of a miserable frog, she crouched together in the corner of the sleeping chamber. But the Viking's wife had listened to the wonderful story and had felt herself strangely moved by it. On their return after this voyage, the men spoke of the beautiful temples built of polished stone which had been raised for the public worship of this holy love. Some vessels, curiously formed of massive gold, had been brought home among the booty. There was a peculiar fragrance about them all, for they were incense vessels, which had been swung before the altars in the temples by the Christian priests. In the deep stony cellars of the castle, the young Christian priest was immured, and his hands and feet tied together with strips of bark. The Viking's wife considered him as beautiful as Balder, and his distress raised her pity. But Helga said he ought to have ropes fastened to his heels and be tied to the tails of wild animals. I would let the dogs loose after him, she said, over the moor and across the heath. Hurrah, that would be a spectacle for the gods, and better still, to follow in its course. But the Viking would not allow him to die such a death as that, especially as he was the disowned and despiser of the high gods. In a few days, he had decided to have him offered as a sacrifice on the bloodstone in the grove. For the first time, a man was to be sacrificed here. Helga begged to be allowed to sprinkle the assembled people with the blood of the priest. She sharpened her glittering knife, and when one of the great savage dogs who were running about the Viking's castle in great numbers sprang towards her, she thrust the knife into his side, merely, as she said, to prove its sharpness. The Viking's wife looked at the wild, badly disposed girl with great sorrow. And when night came on, and her daughter's beautiful form and disposition were changed, she spoke in eloquent words to Helga of the sorrow and deep grief that was in her heart. The ugly frog in its monstrous shape stood before her and raised its brown, mournful eyes to her face, listening to her words and seeming to understand them with the intelligence of a human being. Never once to my lord and husband has a word passed my lips of what I have to suffer through you. My heart is full of grief about you. said the Viking's wife. "The love of a mother is greater and more powerful than I ever imagined. But love never entered thy heart. It is cold and clammy, like the plants on the moor." Then the miserable form trembled. It was as if these words had touched an invisible bond between body and soul, for great tears stood in the eyes. "A bitter time will come for thee at last," continued the Viking's wife, "and it will be terrible for me too. It had been better for thee if thou hadst been left on the high road with the cold night wind to lull thee to sleep." And the Viking's wife shed bitter tears and went away in anger and sorrow, passing under the partition of furs, which hung loose over the beam and divided the hall. The shriveled frog still sat in the corner alone. Deep silence reigned around. At intervals, a half-stifled sigh was heard from its inmost soul. It was the soul of Helga. It seemed in pain, as if a new life were arising in her heart. Then she took a step forward and listened, then stepped again forward and seized with her clumsy hands the heavy bar which was laid across the door. Gently and with much trouble, she pushed back the bar, as silently lifted the latch, and then took up the glimmering lamp which stood in the antechamber of the hall. It seemed as if a stronger will than her own gave her strength. She removed the iron bolt from the closed cellar door and slipped in to the prisoner. I was slumbering. She touched him with her cold, moist hand, and as he awoke and caught sight of the hideous form, he shuddered as if he beheld a wicked apparition. She drew her knife, cut through the bonds which confined his hands and feet, and beckoned to him to follow her. I uttered some holy names and made the sign of the cross, while the form remained motionless by his side. "Who art thou?" he asked, "whose outward appearance is that of an animal, while thou willingly performest acts of mercy?" The frog figure beckoned to him to follow her and led him through a long gallery concealed by hanging drapery to the stables, and then pointed to a horse. He mounted upon it, and she sprang up also before him and held tightly by the animal's mane. The prisoner understood her, and they rode on at a rapid trot by a road which he would never have found by himself across the open heath. He forgot her ugly form and only thought how the mercy and loving kindness of the Almighty was acting through this hideous apparition. As he offered pious prayers and sang holy songs of praise, she trembled. Was it the effect of prayer and praise that caused this, or was she shuddering in the cold morning air at the thought of approaching twilight? What were her feelings? She raised herself up and wanted to stop the horse and spring off, but the Christian priest held her back with all his might, and then sang a pious song, as if this could loosen the wicked charm that had changed her into the semblance of a frog. And the horse galloped on more wildly than before. The sky painted itself red. The first sunbeam pierced through the clouds, and in the clear flood of sunlight, the frog became changed. It was Helga again, young and beautiful, but with a wicked, demoniac spirit. He held now a beautiful young woman in his arms, and he was horrified at the sight. He stopped the horse and sprang from its back. He imagined that some new sorcery was at work. But Helga also leaped from the horse and stood on the ground. The child's short garment reached only to her knee. She snatched the sharp knife from her girdle and rushed like lightning at the astonished priest. "Let me get at thee," she cried. "Let me get at thee, that I may plunge this knife into thy body. Thou art pale as ashes, thou beardless slave." She pressed in upon him. They struggled with each other in heavy combat, but it was as if an invisible power had been given to the Christian in the struggle. He held her fast, and the old oak, under which they stood, seemed to help him, for the loosened roots on the ground became entangled in the maiden's feet and held them fast. Close by rose a bubbling spring, and he sprinkled Helga's face and neck with the water, commanded the unclean spirit to come forth, and pronounced upon her a Christian blessing. But the water of faith has no power unless the wellspring of faith flows within. And yet, even here, its power was shown. Something more than the mere strength of a man opposed itself through his means against the evil which struggled within her. His holy action seemed to overpower her. She dropped her arms, glanced at him with pale cheeks and looks of amazement. He appeared to her a mighty magician skilled in secret arts. His language was the darkest magic to her, and the movements of his hands in the air were as the secret signs of a magician's wand. She would not have blinked had he waved over her head a sharp knife or a glittering axe, but she shrunk from him as he signed her with the sign of the cross on her forehead and breast, and sat before him like a tame bird, with her head bowed down. Then he spoke to her in gentle words of the deed of love she had performed for him during the night when she had come to him in the form of an ugly frog to loosen his bonds and to lead him forth to life and light. And he told her that she was bound in closer fetters than he had been, and that she could recover also life and light by his means. He would take her to Hedabai, to St. Anscorius, and there, in that Christian town, the spell of the sorcerer would be removed. But he would not let her sit before him on the horse, though of her own free will she wished to do so. "Thou must sit behind me, not before me," said he. "Thy magic beauty has a magic power which comes from an evil origin, and I fear it. Still, I am sure to overcome through my faith in Christ." Then he knelt down and prayed with pious fervor. It was as if the quiet woodland were a holy church consecrated by his worship. The birds sang as if they were also of this new congregation, and the fragrance of the wild flowers was as the ambrosial perfume of incense, while above all sounded the words of Scripture, "A light to them that sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide their feet into the way of peace." And he spoke these words with the deep longing of his whole nature. Meanwhile, the horse that had carried them in wild career stood quietly by plucking at the tall bramble bushes till the ripe young berries fell down upon Helga's hands as if inviting her to eat. Patiently, she allowed herself to be lifted on the horse and sat there like a somnambulist, as one who walked in his sleep. The Christian bound 2 branches together with bark in the form of a cross and held it on high as they rode through the forest. The way gradually grew thicker of brushwood as they rode along, till at last it became a trackless wilderness. Bushes of the wild, slow, here and there, blocked up the path so that they had to ride over them. The bubbling spring formed not a stream, but a marsh round, which also they were obliged to guide the horse. Still there were strength and refreshment in the cool forest breeze, and no trifling power in the gentle words spoken in faith and Christian love by the young priest, whose inmost heart yearned to lead this poor lost one into the way of light and life. It is said that raindrops can make a hollow in the hardest stone, and the waves of the sea can smooth and round the rough edges of the rocks. So did the dew of mercy fall upon Helga, softening what was hard and smoothing what was rough in her character. These effects did not yet appear. She was not herself aware of them. Neither does the seed in the lap of earth know when the refreshing dew and the warm sunbeams fall upon it, that it contains within itself power by which it will flourish and bloom. The song of the mother sinks into the heart of the child, and the little one prattles the words after her without understanding their meaning. But after a time, the thoughts expand, and what has been heard in childhood seems to the mind clear and bright. So now, the Word, which is all-powerful to create, was working in the heart of Helga. They rode forth from the thick forest, crossed the heath, and again entered a pathless wood. Here towards evening, they met with robbers. "Where hast thou stolen that beauteous maiden?" cried the robbers, seizing the horse by the bridle and dragging the 2 riders from its back. The priest had nothing to defend himself with but the knife he had taken from Helga, and with this he struck out right and left. One of the robbers raised his axe against him, but the young priest sprang on one side and avoided the blow, which fell with great force on the horse's neck, so that the blood gushed forth, and the animal sunk to the ground. Then Helga seemed suddenly to awake from her long, deep reverie. She threw herself hastily upon the dying animal. The priest placed himself before her to defend and shelter her, but one of the robbers swung his iron axe against the Christian's head with such force that it was dashed to pieces. The blood and brains were scattered about, and he fell dead upon the ground. Then the robbers seized beautiful Helga by her white arms and slender waist. But at that moment the sun went down, and as its last ray disappeared, she was changed into the form of a frog. A greenish-white mouth spread half over her face. Her arms became thin and slimy, while broad hands with webbed fingers spread themselves out like fans. Then the robbers, in terror, let her go, and she stood among them, a hideous monster. And as is the nature of frogs to do, she hopped up as high as her own size and disappeared in the thicket. Then the robbers knew that this must be the work of an evil spirit or some secret sorcery, and in a terrible fright they ran hastily from the spot. The full moon had already risen and was shining in all her radiant splendor over the earth, when from the thicket, in the form of a frog, crept poor Helga. She stood still by the corpse of the Christian priest and the carcass of the dead horse. She looked at them with eyes that seemed to weep, and from the frog's head came forth a croaking sound, as when a child bursts into tears. She threw herself first upon one, and then upon the other, brought water in her hand, which from being webbed was large and hollow, and poured it over them. But they were dead, and dead they would remain. She understood that at last. Soon wild animals would come and tear their dead bodies. But no, that must not happen. Then she dug up the earth as deep as she was able, that she might prepare a grave for them. She had nothing but a branch of a tree, and her two hands, between the fingers of which the webbed skin stretched, and they were torn by the work, while the blood ran down her hands. She saw at last that her work would be useless more than she could accomplish. So she fetched more water and washed the face of the dead, and then covered it with fresh green leaves. She also brought large boughs and spread over him, and scattered dried leaves between the branches. Then she brought the heaviest stones that she could carry and laid them over the dead body, filling up the crevices with moss, till she thought she had fenced in his resting place strongly enough. The difficult task had employed her the whole night, and as the sun broke forth, there stood the beautiful Helga in all her loveliness, with her bleeding hands, and for the first time with tears on her maiden cheeks. It was in this transformation, as if two natures were striving together within her. Her whole frame trembled, and she looked around her as if she had just awoke from a painful dream. She leaned for support against the trunk of a slender tree, and at last climbed to the topmost branches like a cat and seated herself firmly upon them. She remained there the whole day, sitting alone like a frightened squirrel in the silent solitude of the wood, where the rest and stillness is as the calm of death. Butterflies fluttered around her, and close by were several ant hills, each with its hundreds of busy little creatures moving quickly to and fro. In the air danced myriads of gnats, swarm upon swarm, troops of buzzing flies, ladybirds, dragonflies with golden wings, and other little winged creatures. The worm crawled forth from the moist ground, and the moles crept out. But accepting these all around had the stillness of death. But when people say this, they do not quite understand themselves what they mean. None noticed Helga, but a flock of magpies, which flew chattering round the top of the tree on which she sat. These birds hopped close to her on the branches with bold curiosity. A glance from her eyes was a signal to frighten them away, and they were not clever enough to find out who she was. Indeed, she hardly knew herself when the sun was near setting, and the evening's twilight about to commence. The approaching transformation aroused her to fresh exertion. She let herself down gently from the tree, and as the last sunbeam vanished, she stood again in the wrinkled form of a frog, with the torn, webbed skin on her hands. But her eyes now gleamed with more radiant beauty than they had ever possessed in her most beautiful form of loveliness. They were now pure, mild, maidenly eyes that shone forth in the face of a frog. They showed the existence of deep feeling and a human heart, and the beauteous eyes overflowed with tears, weeping precious drops that lightened the heart. On the raised mound, which she had made as a grave for the dead priest, she found the cross made of the branches of a tree, the last work of him who now lay dead and cold beneath it. A sudden thought came to Helga, and she lifted up the cross and planted it upon the grave between the stones that covered him and the dead horse. The sad recollection brought the tears to her eyes, and in this gentle spirit she traced the same sign in the sand round the grave. And as she formed with both her hands the sign of the cross, the web skin fell from them like a torn glove. She washed her hands in the water of the spring and gazed with astonishment at their delicate whiteness. Again, she made the holy sign in the air between herself and the dead man. Her lips trembled, her tongue moved, and the name which she in her ride through the forest had so often heard spoken rose to her lips, and she uttered the words, Jesus Christ. Then the frog skin fell from her. She was once more a lovely maiden. Her head bent wearily. Her tired limbs required rest, and then she slept. Her sleep, however, was short. Towards midnight, she awoke. Before her stood the dead horse, prancing and full of life, which shone forth from his eyes and from his wounded neck. Close by his side appeared the murdered Christian priest, more beautiful than Balder, as the Viking's wife had said. But now he came as if in a flame of fire. Such gravity, such stern justice, such a piercing glance shone from his large, gentle eyes that it seemed to penetrate into every corner of her heart. Beautiful Helga trembled at the look, and her memory returned with a power as if it had been the day of judgment. Every good deed that had been done for her, every loving word that had been said, were vividly before her mind. She understood now that love had kept her here during the day of her trial. While the creature formed of dust and clay, soul and spirit, had wrestled and struggled with evil. She acknowledged that she had only followed the impulses of an evil disposition, that she had done nothing to cure herself. Everything had been given her, and all had happened as it were by the ordination of Providence. She bowed herself, humbly confessed her great imperfections in the sight of Him who can read every fault of the heart. And then the priest spoke. Daughter of the moorland, thou hast come from the swamp and the marshy earth, but from this thou shalt arise. The sunlight shining into thy inmost soul proves the origin from which thou hast really sprung, and has restored the body to its natural form. I am come to thee from the land of the dead, and thou also must pass through the valley to reach the holy mountains, where mercy and perfection dwell. I cannot lead thee to Hedabai, that thou mayest receive Christian baptism. For first, thou must remove the thick veil with which the waters of the moorland are shrouded, and bring forth from its depths the living author of thy being and thy life. Till this is done, thou canst not receive consecration. Then he lifted her on the horse and gave her a golden censer, similar to those she had already seen at the Viking's house. A sweet perfume arose from it, while the open wound in the forehead of the slain priest shone with the rays of a diamond. He took the cross from the grave and held it aloft. And now they rode through the air, over the rustling trees, over the hills, where warriors lay buried, each by his dead war horse. And the brazen, monumental figures rose up and galloped forth and stationed themselves on the summits of the hills. The golden crescent on their foreheads, fastened with golden knots, glittered in the moonlight, and their mantles floated in the wind. The dragon that guards buried treasure lifted his head and gazed after them. The goblins and the satyrs peeped out from beneath the hills and flitted to and fro in the fields, waving blue, red, and green torches like the glowing sparks in burning paper. Over woodland and heath, flood and fen, they flew on till they reached the wild moor, over which they hovered in broad circles. The Christian priest held the cross aloft, and it glittered like gold, while from his lips sounded pious prayers. Beautiful Helga's voice joined with his in the hymns he sung as a child joins in her mother's song. She swung the censer, and a wonderful fragrance of incense arose from it, so powerful that the reeds and rushes of the moor burst forth into blossom. Each germ came forth from the deep ground. All that had life raised itself. Blooming water lilies spread themselves forth like a carpet of wrought flowers, and upon them lay a slumbering woman, young and beautiful. Helga fancied that it was her own image she saw, reflected in the still water. But it was her mother. She beheld the wife of the marsh king, the princess from the land of the Nile, the dead Christian. Priest desired that the sleeping woman should be lifted on the horse, but the horse sank beneath the load, as if he had been a funeral pall fluttering in the wind. But the sign of the cross made the airy phantom strong, and then the three rode away from the marsh to firm ground. At the same moment, the cock crew in the Viking's castle and the dream figures dissolved and floated away in the air, but mother and daughter stood opposite to each other. Am I looking at my own image in the deep water? Said the mother. Is it myself that I see represented on a white shield? Cried the daughter. Then they came nearer to each other in a fond embrace. The mother's heart beat quickly, and she understood the quickened pulses. My child, she exclaimed, the flower of my heart, my lotus flower of the deep water. And she embraced her child again and wept, and the tears were as a baptism of new life and love for Helga. In swan's plumage, I came here, said the mother, and here I threw off my feather dress. Then I sank down through the wavering ground, deep into the marsh, beneath which closed like a wall around me. I found myself, after a while, in fresher water. Still a power drew me down deeper and deeper. I felt the weight of sleep upon my eyelids. Then I slept, and dreams hovered round me. It seemed to me as if I were again in the pyramids of Egypt, and yet the waving elder trunk that had frightened me on the moor stood ever before me. I observed the clefts and wrinkles in the stem. They shone forth in strange colors and took the form of hieroglyphics. It was the mummy case on which I gazed. At last it burst, and forth stepped the 1,000-years-old king the mummy, form black as pitch, black as the shining wood snail, or the slimy mud of the swamp. Whether it was really the mummy or the marsh king, I know not. He seized me in his arms, and I felt as if I must die. When I recovered myself, I found in my bosom a little bird flapping its wings, twittering and fluttering. The bird flew away from my bosom, upwards, towards the dark, heavy canopy above me. But a long green band kept it fastened to me. I heard and understood the tenor of its longings. Freedom, sunlight to my father. Then I thought of my father and the sunny land of my birth, my life and my love. Then I loosened the band and let the bird fly away to its home, to a father. Since that hour, I have ceased to dream. My sleep has been long and heavy, till in this very hour, harmony and fragrance awoke me and set me free. The green band, which fastened the wings of the bird to the mother's heart, where did it flutter? Now whither had it been wafted? The stork only had seen it. The band was the green stalk, the cup of the flower, the cradle in which lay the child that now in blooming beauty had been folded to the mother's heart. And while the two were resting in each other's arms, the old stork flew round and round them in narrowing circles, till at length he flew away swiftly to his nest and fetched away the 2 suits of swan's feathers, which he had preserved there for many years. Then he returned to the mother and daughter and threw the swan's plumage over them. The feathers immediately closed around them, and they rose up from the earth in the form of 2 white swans. And now we can converse with pleasure, said the stork papa. We can understand one another, although the beaks of birds are so different in shape. It is very fortunate that you came tonight. Tomorrow we should have been gone. The mother, myself, and the little ones, we're about to fly to the south. Look at me now. I am an old friend from the Nile, and a mother's heart contains more than her beak. She always said that the princess would know how to help herself. I and the young ones carried the swan's feathers over here, and I am glad of it now, and how lucky it is that I am here still. When the day dawns, we shall start with a great company of other storks. We'll fly first, and you can follow in our track so that you cannot miss your way. I and the young ones will have an eye upon you, and the lotus flower which I was to take with me, said the Egyptian princess, is flying here by my side, clothed in swan's feathers. The flower of my heart will travel with me, and so the riddle is solved. Now for home, now for home. But Helga said she could not leave the Danish land without once more seeing her foster mother, the loving wife of the Viking. Each pleasing recollection, each kind word, every tear from the heart, which her foster mother had wept for her, rose in her mind, and at that moment she felt as if she loved this mother the best. Yes, we must go to the Viking's castle, said the stork. Mother and the young ones are waiting for me there. How they will open their eyes and flap their wings. My wife, you see, does not say much. She is short and abrupt in her manner, but she means well for all that. I will flap my wings at once that they may hear us coming. Then Stork Papa flapped his wings in first-rate style, and he and the swans flew away to the Viking's castle. In the castle, everyone was in a deep sleep. It had been late in the evening before the Viking's wife retired to rest. She was anxious about Helga, who 3 days before had vanished with the Christian priest. Helga must have helped him in his flight, for it was her horse that was missed from the stable. But by what power had all this been accomplished? The Viking's wife thought of it with wonder, thought on the miracles which they said could be performed by those who believed in the Christian faith and followed its teachings. These passing thoughts formed themselves into a vivid dream, and it seemed to her that she was still lying awake on her couch, while without darkness reigned. A storm arose. She heard the lake dashing and rolling from east and west like the waves of the North Sea or the Kattegat. The monstrous snake, which it is said surrounds the earth in the depths of the ocean, was trembling in spasmodic convulsions. The night of the fall of the gods was come, Ragnarok, as the heathens call the judgment day, when everything shall pass away, even the high gods themselves. The war trumpet sounded. Riding upon the rainbow came the gods clad in steel to fight their last battle on the last battlefield. Before them flew the winged vampires, and the dead warriors closed up the train. The whole firmament was ablaze with the northern lights, and yet the darkness triumphed. It was a terrible hour, and close to the terrified woman, Helga seemed to be seated on the floor in the hideous form of a frog, yet trembling and clinging to her foster mother, who took her on her lap and lovingly caressed her hideous and frog-like as she was. The air was filled with the clashing of arms and the hissing of arrows, as if a storm of hail was descending upon the earth. It seemed to her the hour when earth and sky would burst asunder and all things be swallowed up in Saturn's fiery lake. But she knew that a new heaven and a new earth would arise, and that cornfields would wave where now the lake rolled over desolate sands, and the ineffable God rain. Then she saw rising from the region of the dead Balder, the gentle, the loving, and as the Viking's wife gazed upon him, she recognized his countenance. It was the captive Christian priest. "White Christian," she exclaimed aloud, and with the words she pressed a kiss on the forehead of the hideous frog child. Then the frog skin fell off, and Helga stood before her in all her beauty, more lovely and gentle-looking, and with eyes beaming with love. She kissed the hands of her foster mother, blessed her for all her fostering love and care during the days of her trial and misery, for the thoughts she had suggested and awoke in her heart, and for naming the name which she now repeated. Then beautiful Helga rose as a mighty swan and spread her wings with the rushing sound of troops of birds of passage flying through the air. Then the Viking's wife awoke, but she still heard the rushing sound without. She knew it was the time for the storks to depart, and that it must be their wings which she heard. She felt she should like to see them once more and bid them farewell. She rose from her couch, stepped out on the threshold, and beheld on the ridge of the roof a party of storks ranged side by side. Troops of the birds were flying in circles over the castle and the highest trees. But just before her, as she stood on the threshold and close to the well, where Helga had so often sat and alarmed her with her wildness, now stood two swans gazing at her with intelligent eyes. Then she remembered her dream, which still appeared to her as a reality. She thought of Helga in the form of a swan. She thought of a Christian priest, and suddenly a wonderful joy arose in her heart. The swans flapped their wings and arched their necks as if to offer her a greeting, and the Viking's wife spread out her arms towards them as if she accepted it, and smiled through her tears. She was roused from deep thought by a rustling of wings and snapping of beaks. All the storks arose and started on their journey towards the south. "We will not wait for the swans," said the mama stork. "If they want to go with us, let them come now. We can't sit here till the plovers start. It is a fine thing, after all, to travel in families, not like the finches and the partridges. There the male and the female birds fly in separate flocks, which, to speak candidly, I consider very unbecoming. What are those swans flapping their wings for? Well, everyone flies in his own fashion, said the papa stork. The swans fly in an oblique line, the cranes in the form of a triangle, and the plovers in a curved line like a snake. Don't talk about snakes while we are flying up here, said Stork Mama. It puts ideas into the children's heads that cannot be realized. Are those the high mountains I have heard spoken of? Asked Helga in the swan's plumage. They are storm clouds driving along beneath us, replied her mother. What are yonder white clouds that rise so high? Again inquired Helga. Those are mountains covered with perpetual snows that you see yonder, said her mother. And then they flew across the Alps towards the blue Mediterranean, Africa's land, Egyptia's strand, sang the daughter of the Nile in her swan's plumage, as from the upper air she caught sight of her native land, a narrow golden wavy strip on the shores of the Nile. The other birds espied it also and hastened their flight. I can smell the Nile mud and the wet frogs, said the stork Mama, and I begin to feel quite hungry. Yes, now you shall taste something nice, and you will see the marabout bird, and the ibis, and the crane. They all belong to our family, but they are not nearly so handsome as we are. They give themselves great airs, especially the ibis. The Egyptians have spoiled him. They make a mummy of him and stuff him with spices. I would rather be stuffed with live frogs, and so would you, and so you shall. Better have something in your inside while you are alive than to be made a parade of after you are dead. That is my opinion, and I am always right. The storks are come, was said in the great house on the banks of the Nile, where the Lord lay in the hall on his downy cushions, covered with a leopard skin, scarcely alive, yet not dead, waiting and hoping for the lotus flower from the deep moorland in the far north. Relatives and servants were standing by his couch when the two beautiful swans who had come with the storks flew into the hall. They threw off their soft white plumage, and two lovely female forms approached the pale, sick old man and threw back their long hair. And when Helga bent over her grandfather, redness came back to his cheeks, his eyes brightened, and life returned to his benumbed limbs. The old man rose up with health and energy renewed. Daughter and grandchild welcomed him as joyfully as if with a morning greeting after a long and troubled dream. Joy reigned through the whole house as well as in the stork's nest. Although there, the chief cause was really the good food, especially the quantities of frogs which seemed to spring out of the ground in swarms. Then the learned men hastened to note down in flying characters the story of the two princesses and spoke of the arrival of the health-giving flower as a mighty event, which had been a blessing to the house and the land. Meanwhile, the stork papa told the story to his family in his own way, but not till they had eaten and were satisfied. Otherwise, they would have had something else to do than to listen to stories. "Well," said the stork mama when she had heard it, "you will be made something of at last. I suppose they can do nothing less." "What could I be made?" said stork papa. "What have I done? Just nothing." "You have done more than all the rest," she replied. "But for you and the youngsters, the two young princesses would never have seen Egypt again, and the recovery of the old man would not have been effected. You will become something. They must certainly give you a doctor's hood, and our young ones will inherit it, and their children after them, and so on. You already look like an Egyptian doctor, at least in my eyes." I cannot quite remember the words I heard when I listened on the roof, said Stork Papa, while relating the story to his family. All I know is that what the wise men said was so complicated and so learned that they received not only rank, but presents. Even the head cook at the great house was honored with a mark of distinction, most likely for the soup. "And what did you receive?" said the stork mama. They certainly ought not to forget the most important person in the affair, as you really are. The learned men have done nothing at all but use their tongues. Surely they will not overlook you. Late in the night, while the gentle sleep of peace rested on the now happy house, there was still one watcher. It was not Stork Papa, who, although he stood on guard on one leg, could sleep soundly. Helga alone was awake. She leaned over the balcony, gazing at the sparkling stars that shone clearer and brighter in the pure air than they had done in the north, and yet they were the same stars. She thought of the Viking's wife in the wild moorland, of the gentle eyes of her foster mother, and of the tears she had shed over the poor frog child that now lived in splendor and starry beauty by the waters of the Nile, with air balmy and sweet as spring. She thought of the love that dwelt in the breast of the heathen woman, love that had been shown to a wretched creature, hateful as a human being, and hideous when in the form of an animal. She looked at the glittering stars and thought of the radiance that had shone forth on the forehead of the dead man as she had fled with him over the woodland and moor. Tones were awakened in her memory, words which she had heard him speak as they rode onward when she was carried, wondering and trembling, through the air. Words from the great fountain of love, the highest love that embraces all the human race. What had not been won and achieved by this love, day and night. Beautiful. Helga was absorbed in the contemplation of the great amount of her happiness, and lost herself in the contemplation, like a child who turns hurriedly from the giver to examine the beautiful gifts. She was overpowered with her good fortune, which seemed always increasing, and therefore, what might it become in the future? Had she not been brought by a wonderful miracle to all this joy and happiness? And in these thoughts she indulged, until at last she thought no more of the giver. It was the overabundance of youthful spirits unfolding its wings for a daring flight. Her eyes sparkled with energy when suddenly arose a loud noise in the court below, and the daring thought vanished. She looked down and saw 2 large ostriches running round quickly in narrow circles. She had never seen these creatures before. Great, coarse, clumsy-looking birds with curious wings that looked as if they had been clipped, and the birds themselves had the appearance of having been roughly used. She inquired about them, and for the first time heard the legend which the Egyptians relate respecting the ostrich. Once say they, the ostriches were a beautiful and glorious race of birds with large, strong wings. One evening, the other large birds of the forest said to the ostrich, "Brother, shall we fly to the river tomorrow morning to drink, God willing?" And the ostrich answered, "I will, with the break of day." Therefore they commenced their flight, first rising high in the air towards the sun, which is the eye of God. Still higher and higher, the ostrich flew far above. The other birds, proudly approaching the light, trusting in its own strength, and thinking not of the giver, or saying, "If God will." When suddenly the avenging angel drew back the veil from the flaming ocean of sunlight, and in a moment the wings of the proud bird were scorched and shriveled, and they sunk miserably to the earth. Since that time, the ostrich and his race have never been able to rise in the air. They can only fly terror-stricken along the ground, or run round and round in narrow circles. It is a warning to mankind that in all our thoughts and schemes, and in every action we undertake, we should say, "If God will." Then Helga bowed her head thoughtfully and seriously, and looked at the circling ostrich as with timid fear and simple pleasure. It glanced at its own great shadow on the sunlit walls, and the story of the ostrich sunk deeply into the heart and mind of Helga. A life of happiness, both in the present and in the future, seemed secure for her, and what was yet to come might be the best of all, God willing. Early in the spring, when the storks were again about to journey northward, beautiful Helga took off her golden bracelets, scratched her name on them, and beckoned to the stork father. He came to her, and she placed the golden circlet round his neck and begged him to deliver it safely to the Viking's wife, so that she might know that her foster daughter still lived, was happy, and had not forgotten her. "It is rather heavy to carry," thought Stork Papa when he had it on his neck. "But gold and are not to be flung into the street. The stork brings good fortune. They'll be obliged to acknowledge that at last. You lay gold and I lay eggs," said Stork Mama. "With you, it is only once in a way I lay eggs every year. But no one appreciates what we do. I call it very mortifying. But then we have a consciousness of our own worth, Mother," replied Stork Papa. "What good will that do you?" retorted Stork Mama. "It will neither bring you a fair wind nor a good meal. The little nightingale who is singing yonder in the tamarind grove will soon be going north, too." Helga said she had often heard her singing on the wild moor, so she determined to send a message by her. While flying in the swan's plumage, she had learnt the bird language. She had often conversed with the stork and the swallow, and she knew that the nightingale would understand. So she begged the nightingale to fly to the beechwood on the peninsula of Jutland, where a mound of stone and twigs had been raised to form the grave. And she begged the nightingale to persuade all the other little birds to build their nests round the place, so that evermore should resound over that grave music and song. And the nightingale flew away, and time flew away also. In the autumn, an eagle standing upon a pyramid saw a stately train of richly laden camels and men attired in armor on foaming Arabian steeds, whose glossy skins shone like silver. Their nostrils were pink, and their thick, flowing manes hung almost to their slender legs. A royal prince of Arabia, handsome as a prince should be, and accompanied by distinguished guests, was on his way to the stately house on the roof of which the storks' empty nests might be seen. They were away now in the far north, but expected to return very soon. And indeed, they returned on a day that was rich in joy and gladness. A marriage was being celebrated, in which the beautiful Helga, glittering in silk and jewels, was the bride, and the bridegroom, the young Arab prince. Bride and bridegroom sat at the upper end of the table between the bride's mother and grandfather. But her gaze was not on the bridegroom, with his manly, sunburnt face, round which curled a black beard, and whose dark, fiery eyes were fixed upon her, but away from him at a twinkling star that shone down upon her from the sky. Then was heard the sound of rushing wings beating the air. The storks were coming home, and the old stork pair, although tired with the journey and requiring rest, did not fail to fly down at once to the balustrades of the veranda, for they knew already what feast was being celebrated. They had heard of it on the borders of the land, and also that Helga had caused their figures to be represented on the walls, for they belonged to her history. "I call that very sensible and pretty," said Stork Papa. "Yes, but it is very little," said Mama Stork. "They could not possibly have done less." But when Helga saw them, she rose and went out into the veranda to stroke the backs of the storks. The old stork pair bowed their heads and curved their necks, and even the youngest among the young ones felt honored by this reception. Helga continued to gaze upon the glittering star, which seemed to glow brighter and purer in its light. Then, between herself and the star, floated a form purer than the air, and visible through it. It floated quite near to her, and she saw that it was the dead Christian priest, who also was coming to her wedding feast, coming from the heavenly kingdom. "The glory and brightness yonder outshines all that is known on earth," said he. Then Helga, the fair, prayed more gently and more earnestly than she had ever prayed in her life before. Before that, she might be permitted to gaze, if only for a single moment, at the glory and brightness of the heavenly kingdom. Then she felt herself lifted up, as it were above the earth, through a sea of sound and thought. Not only around her, but within her, was there light and song, such as words cannot express. "Now we must return," he said. "You will be missed. Only one more look," she begged. "But one short moment more. We must return to earth. The guests will have all departed. Only one more look. The last." Then Helga stood again in the veranda. But the marriage lamps in the festive hall had been all extinguished, and the torches outside had vanished. The storks were gone. Not a guest could be seen. No bridegroom. All in those few short moments seemed to have died. Then a great dread fell upon her. She stepped from the veranda through the empty hall into the next chamber, where slept strange warriors. She opened a side door, which once led into her own apartment. But now, as she passed through, she found herself suddenly in a garden, which she had never before seen. Here the sky blushed red. It was the dawn of morning. 3 minutes only in heaven, and a whole night on earth had passed away. Then she saw the storks, and called to them in their own language. Then Stork Papa turned his head towards her, listened to her words, and drew near. "You speak our language," said he. "What do you wish? Why do you appear? You, a strange woman. It is I. It is Helga. Dost thou not know me? 3 minutes ago we were speaking together. yonder in the veranda." "That is a mistake," said the stork. "You must have dreamed all this." "No, no," she exclaimed. Then she reminded him of the Vikings' castle, of the great lake, and of the journey across the ocean. Then Stork. Papa winked his eyes and said, "Why, that's an old story, which happened in the time of my grandfather. There certainly was a princess of that kind here in Egypt, once, who came from the Danish land, but she vanished on the evening of her wedding day, many 100 years ago, and never came back. You may read about it yourself yonder on a monument in the garden. There you will find swans and storks sculptured, and on the top is a figure of the princess Helga in marble." And so it was. Helga understood it all now and sank on her knees. The sun burst forth in all its glory, and as in olden times, the form of the frog vanished in his beams, and the beautiful form stood forth in all its loveliness. So now, bathed in light, rose a beautiful form, purer, clearer than air, a ray of brightness from the source of light, himself. The body crumbled into dust, and a faded lotus flower lay on the spot on which Helga had stood. "Now, that is a new ending to the story," said Stork Papa. "I really never expected it would end in this way, but it seems a very good ending. And what will the young ones say to it?" "I wonder," said Stork Mama. "Ah, that is a very important question," replied the stork.
you.